affecting you. Park Radio's look at the issues and events locals are talking about.
Thanks for joining us. You're listening to Friends of Banff Park Radio 101.1 FM. I'm Camara Miller, and in the studio again today we have Larissa Barlow, editor of the Banff Crag Canyon, and Hamish MacLean, editor of the Canmore Leader. Thanks for coming in again this week.
Hey, Camara.
Thanks, Camara.
So, bears and train tracks, as we all know, we've talked about it many times in the studio before, clearly don't work well together in this environment.
They have their issues.
We have something really cool to talk about that recently came up, an agreement between Parks Canada and CP Rail. I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, Larissa.
Yeah, this plan has been in the works for a while. Back in October of last year, CP committed $1 million to a research project that would come up with new and innovative ways to help keep bears off the train tracks, because we all too often see many grizzlies and black bears getting hit by trains in the summer, and it's very unfortunate. And this new plan that was announced this week includes a 5-year research plan and some ideas to turn some sections of the track in the park into a sort of living laboratory where they're going to try out some of these ideas to see if they can keep bears off the tracks. But I think the most interesting part of it is in late September, they're going to host a symposium in Banff, and they're going to invite bear experts and transportation experts to the community to talk about some new and interesting ways to keep bears and train tracks away from each other.
Yeah.
And those researchers will then be able to apply for $1 million that CP has set aside, and hopefully put some things into action so we can get to a point where we don't have all of these problems that we see in the summer.
Right. I mean, this is really a problem because, as we've seen, grizzly bear numbers have been declining drastically, and of recent studies that we've been hearing, our grizzly bear population is actually in an unsustainable number. So each bear we lose on the tracks, and we've lost quite a few this summer already, is detrimental to the population. So what are some of the methods that we're going to be hearing take place as the experiment unfolds?
Some of the things that have already been going on are vegetation management, which means parks crews are going around to the train tracks and cutting down any sort of plants that might be attractive to a bear to eat. So that's one thing. I mean, they've all done these things before. Have the CP's vacuum truck go along, try to pick up the grain that might have spilled in the park, or hazing techniques to keep the bears off. But that only works so much. You can haze a bear off, but it will return. Mm-hmm. So the big thing is, they have a lot of ideas of what they want to do. They want to find these root causes of what's bringing the animals to the tracks, find out those reasons, and then find out some ways to keep them off the tracks. And I think this symposium is really going to be beneficial in that way. So
how are we going to measure success at the end of the 5 years?
Well, I think, I asked if success was going to be, no more bears are killed. And they said, there's really not that. That's not going to happen, because even with the road, we still see bears and other animals sometimes getting on the road and getting hit. I think if it's just, reduced drastically, then that's going to be success. If we can get to the point where maybe we have a summer where only one is hit, maybe we go a couple of summers without one getting hit. Something like that would probably be a big success.
We'll keep up with this as the months lead up to the symposium. Going over to Canmore now, some interesting news about the highway, where we had some news about that actually in the winter. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, the Smith-Dorian Trail, or the Spray Lakes Road, is a highway that has seen increased use over the years as the Kananaskis country is becoming sort of more popular for Calgarians and all that stuff. But last winter, right at New Year, December 30th, I believe it was, we had, it's tough to say high profile, but we had a small SUV fall into the water during freezing temperatures. It wasn't really doing anything wrong. 4 people went into the water and 1 person came out alive. We had 3 deaths, and it was tragic. And that did prompt a review by Alberta Transportation. And it looks like they're partnering with the Kananaskis Improvement District to make some changes on the road. Nothing too drastic, though, because I think part of the charm of Canmore is the fact that everything's super rustic.
Right. And so close and accessible, too.
And so close and accessible. And that road is well used by Canmore residents, for sure.
Well, it's such, if people haven't driven on the road before, it's really close to the water,
Yep.
of course, which is the problem.
Yep.
And there's no railing or...
Constant blind corners.
Sure, yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's the thing, is that as you get closer down, where it sort of hooks up to Highway 40 at the end near the Peter Lougheed Visitor Info Center. But this highway starts out at not even gravel highway standard, and then slowly gets better as you sort of move towards Bragg Creek.
How can it still be a highway being used if it's not at gravel highway standard?
Well, because it's whose jurisdiction is it, who has to maintain it, I think has been the issue in the past. It's even tough for them to figure out how to put in guardrails at certain points. It's easy enough for them to move signs if they think signs are in the wrong place, but you can't even say that it's up to the travelers, because this group of largely Calgary residents that went into the water last year, there were eyewitnesses who said that they were not traveling at high speeds.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Just icy.
And it was just icy conditions, and they just sort of went in, and so nobody was doing anything wrong. Would a guardrail have saved them at the time? People could only say, who knows, you know?
Yeah, and what stage are we at now in this process? Are they just talking about fixing the road, or?
Well, they're saying right now that cost is not the issue, although it's about $350,000 that they're expecting to spend. But what happened was, when they're looking at the road while they're doing their safety review and report, it was snow covered a lot. And so they've had to wait until sort of the snow cleared up to actually see what they're looking at on the ground. But things that they've done already is signage changes. Things that they have to do in the future are like, if we remove some of these trees, maybe you can see around this corner and it'll be a little more safe. You know what I mean? But now how do we go about that? Because some of it's even private land. And even, I was talking to one guy who was saying that even putting in guardrails, a lot of that, there's pond liners there because it's actually a reservoir. And so there are, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
sort of third-party interests that need to be...
Sure.
You know what I mean?
And then quickly, before I let you guys go, there was a report in Calgary last week. There's a lot of tourists going into Banff right now. You know, we've seen a real decline in the tourism industry, and both of you and I have been speaking off and on about how we've seen more help wanted signs, and there are no vacancy signs in the hotels. But we've also had a real surge in politicians visiting our town as well. Let's quickly talk about who you guys have been bumping into in the last couple weeks.
Well, I interviewed Wild Rose Alliance leader Daniel Smith last week, and I think you had David Swan of the Liberal Party.
Sure, yeah. And you went and saw 6 Tory leadership candidates go and talk to educators.
Yeah, it's been quite a couple of weeks in the Bow Valley, attracting a lot of politicians to the area. Makes you think an election's right around the corner.
Makes you think there's an election right around the corner. But the thing that's interesting, too, is there's a lot of question marks here. Wild Rose, they do have a candidate in place. And our MLA right now, Janice Tarchuk, has still not said whether or not she'll run again.
Right.
The Liberals don't have anybody in place.
Yeah.
You know, so it's interesting.
You know, it's the word you used is so perfect that it's a question mark, because our riding is so huge and so diverse, and often members of the Bow Valley can feel like our voice isn't being heard. So to hear that we have a bunch of politicians coming out and
giving us some love
is nice to hear. Was there any couple points that stuck out for you guys during your interviews with these visitors?
Well, I think for the Wild Rose Alliance, definitely they're really trying to make gains, and they're just trying to get out there and try to let people know they're still around, and they're still very intent on winning a bunch of seats in the next election. And they're going after MLAs. They're going after Janice Tarchuk, who's been our MLA since the late 90s, and they're saying it's time for a change. And maybe voters will be interested in that. Maybe they won't be. But as it stands right now, MLA Janice Tarchuk has not indicated whether she's running.
Is that out of character for her?
No, it's pretty normal, and I think it's pretty normal, really, for any politician who's maybe been around for a while.
She's a veteran and a bro.
They kind of let you know. But I think if she wasn't running, she probably would have let the party know very quickly, and there'd already be moves to put someone new in that role. But so I'm assuming she's for sure running again. And she's going to probably start campaigning pretty soon.
But it's interesting
Barely.
too, because we've got the Wild Rose, we've got the Alberta Party, two new parties, and then we've got the Conservatives who've been in power for like 40 years, and the Liberals who've been shut out of power for 40 years. But what we've got is we've got two leadership races going on, and we had a very popular premier here replaced by somebody who sort of wasn't as popular, and we've got a Liberal leadership as well, where they've got the whole gamut. They've got a guy that just sort of actually walked the other way across the floor for the first time in decades. Somebody leaving the Conservatives to go to the Liberals. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of sort of question marks, and I think a lot of those question marks are, again, sort of, what do you call, like ramped up or bumped up just because we've got these wild cards.
Right.
The seemingly very popular Wild Rose and the Alberta Party, which gains a lot of traction here for being a centrist party. So yeah, I think that Alberta politics might actually be interesting in the future or near future.
For sure in September, when we start seeing some votes for leaders, that'll definitely be interesting. And for the Liberal Party as well, it'll be interesting to see who they put forward, because they're going to have a big fight on their hands, especially with the Wild Rose Alliance making gains. Right,
and that's something where they see a group like the Wild Rose who could take votes away from the Conservative Party, and we've got a new party where the identity is not so clear. We've got a Conservative Party where whichever way they go in their leadership, they could have a new identity. And we've got a Liberal Party that has no identity. They were talking about name changes not too far in the past. And then we've got the Alberta Party, which a lot of people don't yet know about. So it's interesting. We've had so many known commodities for so long in Alberta politics to have so many unknown sort of quantities.
From what people were talking about, the feedback you guys got from the readers, what's one of the issues that you quickly want to brief on that we can touch on next week that some of the politicians are addressing right now?
I'll go with this.
Oh, we're both going to say something at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. But I know that, the Canadian Rockies Public School Division was hit hard by education
cuts.
We'll say cuts. And it was a big issue when they realized that they weren't going to be able to hire back a lot of the teachers that they had this year coming in. And I know that Larissa was just at a PC leadership sort of talk to educators. So I think education will be a touchstone issue in this Banff Cochrane area.
It was a debate or a forum held by the Alberta Teachers Association. So many, if not all, the questions were education related.
Sure.
So there were a couple of interesting promises made out there. So it'll be
we'll have to touch on that next week when it comes out in the paper, and we won't give anything away. Thank you again, Hamish and Larissa, for joining me, and we'll talk next week.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Camara.
That was Hamish MacLean, editor of the Canmore Leader, and Larissa Barlow, editor of the Banff Crag Canyon. You can hear my interview with both of them each week as we discuss current events and what locals are talking about most. Tune in on Sunday at about 8:45 for the interview, but you can also check us out online at parkradio.ca. Click on the podcast link and you can hear some of the past interviews. And if you are picking up the Canmore Leader or Crag Canyon, you can see our QR code that runs, and if you'd like to catch an early preview of our episode, you can find it out each week as the paper comes out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.